Earl Jennings had always been the man who prided himself on his success. He had a good job, a lovely house, and a family that looked up to him. But somewhere along the way, the spark had gone out of his marriage. His wife, Vanessa, was no longer the woman he had fallen in love with, and their children, Jamie and Tasha, had grown older and more independent. He found himself feeling distant from them all. Then came Michelle. She was everything Vanessa wasn't: adventurous, spontaneous, carefree. Earl met Michelle at work, where she worked in a different department. She was young, full of life, and she made him feel alive again. Their secret meetings started as innocent conversations over coffee, but soon they became passionate exchanges behind closed doors. Earl found himself captivated by her, and the more time he spent with her, the more he resented his home life. It all came to a head one cold evening. He had been home late, a habit that was becoming more frequent. Vanessa was waiting for him as always, with a warm meal on the table and an eager smile. But Earl barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, thinking about Michelle. "Are you okay, Earl?" Vanessa asked softly. "You've been so distant lately." Earl snapped. He had been holding in his frustration for months, and now it all came rushing out. "I'm tired of this. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not. I don't want this anymore." Vanessa looked shocked, as though she had been slapped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done, Vanessa. I'm done with this family. I'm moving on. I've met someone else." Vanessa stood there in disbelief as the words hit her like a hammer. "What do you mean?" "Earl, please. I'm moving in with Michelle. I can't keep doing this. You and the kids, you're not my priority anymore." Earl's words stung, but the finality in his tone left no room for argument. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to understand what was happening. But there was no reversing the decision. "Fine," Vanessa whispered, her voice shaking. "If that's what you want, then go." That night, Earl packed a few bags and left. He didn't look back as he drove to Michelle's apartment, where she was waiting with open arms. Life with Michelle was everything Earl had imagined and more. Their apartment was small but cozy, and Michelle's free-spirited nature kept him entertained. For a few weeks, he felt like he had reclaimed his youth. No responsibilities, no nagging from Vanessa, just fun and excitement. But slowly, the excitement began to fade. The reality of living with Michelle was nothing like the fantasy he had built in his mind. She was spontaneous, yes, but she was also unpredictable and demanding. Earl found himself juggling between his work and Michelle's whims, which often clashed with his need for stability. It wasn't long before he began to miss the little things he had taken for granted when he was with Vanessa. He missed the smell of Vanessa's cooking, the way she made sure the house was always neat, and how she would kiss him goodnight even when they were both exhausted. Most of all, he missed his kids, Jamie and Tasha, who were growing up without him. His daughter had stopped calling him Daddy and started calling him by his first name. Jamie was angry with him, and Tasha had withdrawn completely. Michelle, on the other hand, was often distant, consumed by her own world. She had no interest in playing the role of a mother to Earl's children, and that was becoming a problem. Earl found himself alone in a relationship he had once thought would make him happy. The guilt began to eat at him, especially when he saw pictures of Vanessa and the kids on social media, looking happy without him. He tried calling Vanessa a few times, but each time she answered, there was no warmth in her voice. She had moved on, to finding strength in her independence. She told him the kids were doing fine and that she didn't need him. The weight of his decisions pressed heavily on Earl. He had thrown away everything for a fleeting desire. But now, the reality of his choices was clearer than ever. Weeks turned into months, and the honeymoon phase with Michelle had long passed. Earl found himself constantly comparing her to Vanessa. He began to see the flaws in Michelle, and the traits he once admired now seemed superficial. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake. One evening, while lying in bed, Earl's phone buzzed. It was a message from Jamie. "Dad, I hate you." The word stung, but it was the finality in them that broke his heart. His son, who had once looked up to him, now hated him. Earl tossed the phone aside, unable to respond. Michelle, noticing his distress, asked, "What's wrong?" "I messed up," Earl confessed. "I shouldn't have done it. I left them for you, and now I don't know what to do." Michelle looked at him, her face hardening. "You can't just turn it on and off, Earl. You made your choice." But Earl couldn't shake the guilt. He began to question everything: his marriage, his decisions, his priorities. The house he had once shared with Vanessa and the kids now seemed like a distant memory. His family, the life he had built, was gone, and he didn't know how to fix it. The final straw came one afternoon when Earl received a call from Vanessa. She told him that Jamie had been acting out at school, and Tasha had withdrawn completely. "They need you, Earl. They need their father, and I can't do this alone anymore." Earl's heart sank. This was the wake-up call he had needed. He realized how deeply he had hurt his family, and no matter how much he tried, he couldn't undo the damage. He sat in silence, staring at the phone for what felt like an eternity before responding. "I'm coming home." Michelle was furious when Earl told her he was leaving. "You're just going to walk out on me? After everything?" "I made a mistake," Earl said quietly. "I need to be with my family." He left Michelle, leaving behind the life he had built in her apartment. He drove back to the house he once called home, feeling both relieved and terrified. Vanessa didn't welcome him with open arms, but she didn't shut the door either. The road to redemption was long. Earl had a lot to make up for, and it would take time to rebuild the trust he had shattered. But he was ready to try. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that the price of desire was far greater than the fleeting pleasure it brought. As for Vanessa, she had moved on in her own way. She wasn't waiting for Earl to return, but she was willing to give him a chance to prove that he could be a father to their children again. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Earl, one where he would work tirelessly to regain the love and trust he had lost. But deep inside, Earl knew that the regret of losing it all would never truly fade. Earl returned to the house, and as he stepped inside, the silence was overwhelming. The walls that had once echoed with the laughter of his children now felt cold and unfamiliar. Vanessa was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from the exhaustion of raising their kids alone. But she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her silence spoke volumes. She had given him so many chances before, and he had thrown them away. Earl's heart ached as he stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. His children were upstairs, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a father to them. He had been replaced in their lives by time, by absence, and by his own selfish choices. "Vanessa," Earl began, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I know I can't just walk back in and pretend like nothing happened, but I want to try. For the kids, and for us, if you'll let me." Vanessa didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him with a mixture of pain and resignation. She had been through too much to just forgive him with a few words. She had learned to be strong on her own, to stand up for herself and their children without him. But there was a part of her that still wanted to believe that the man she had married could come back to her, that the man who had been her partner, the father of their children, could redeem himself. "You left us, Earl," Vanessa said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You chose her over your family. And now you expect me to just let you back and like nothing happened?" Earl hung his head in shame. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't expect you to just take me back. But please, give me a chance to prove that I can be the man I used to be, the father they need, the husband you once loved. I can't undo the past, but I can try to make the future better." Vanessa's eyes softened slightly, but she remained firm. "You've got a lot of work to do, Earl. I can't promise you anything. I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had, but you can start by being a father to your kids again." Earl nodded, his throat tight. He had been so blinded by his desires and mistakes that he hadn't realized the gravity of what he had lost until it was almost too late. He had to prove himself, not just to Vanessa, but to his children, who were now living with the consequences of his choices. Over the next few months, Earl did everything he could to make amends. He spent his evenings after work helping Jamie with his school projects and listening to Tasha's stories about her friends and her life. At first, Jamie barely spoke to him. His son was angry, hurt, and confused. But Earl was patient, showing up every day, trying to rebuild the relationship that had been broken. Tasha, on the other hand, was quieter. She had always been the more sensitive one, and the abandonment had hit her hard. But she was slowly opening up to him again, even if it was just a little at a time. Earl would sit with her on the couch reading stories, or just watching her favorite cartoons, trying to show her that he was still there, still her father, no matter what had happened. Earl also started to help around the house. Vanessa didn't expect him to pick up where he left off, but he took on the responsibilities that he had once ignored. He fixed the broken faucets, mowed the lawn, and made dinner when Vanessa was too tired. Slowly, he began to restore the trust he had destroyed. He was doing it for his children, but also for himself, to prove that he could be the man he had once been. But there were moments when the weight of his past choices would come crashing down on him. He'd be in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, when he would remember the way Vanessa had looked at him the night he left. The way Jamie had called him Earl instead of Dad. The thought of Michelle crossed his mind occasionally, but it was fleeting now, as he saw her for what she truly was, a brief distraction, a moment of weakness. He had been foolish to think that she could fill the void he had neglected for so long. The hardest moments were when Vanessa would catch him looking at their wedding photo on the mantel. She would see the sadness in his eyes, the regret, and it reminded her of the man she had loved once. But it also reminded her of how much he had hurt her, how much she had sacrificed for him, and how, despite everything, she couldn't just let go of the bitterness so easily. It had been a year since Earl had come back, and while things were far from perfect, they were better. The family was healing slowly, and the trust was coming back in small doses. Earl had taken responsibility for his mistakes, but he knew that rebuilding a family wasn't something that happened overnight. One Sunday afternoon, Earl sat in the living room with Jamie and Tasha, watching the game. They were talking about school, about their friends, and about life. It was small, simple moments like this that Earl cherished now, moments he had once taken for granted. For the first time in a long while, he felt content. Vanessa entered the room, a cup of tea in hand. She had softened over time, and while their relationship was still a work in progress, there was a quiet understanding between them. She sat down beside Earl, and for a moment they were simply a family again. No anger, no bitterness, just the quiet peace of a family slowly healing. "You've come a long way, Earl," Vanessa said softly, her voice steady. Earl looked at her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I know I've made mistakes. I can't take them back, but I'm trying. I want us to be a family again. I want to make things right." Vanessa gave him a small, cautious smile. "You're not perfect, Earl. But neither am I. We've both changed. But I think we can make this work. For Jamie, for Tasha, for us." And for the first time in years, Earl felt hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was determined to make it right. The regret would always be there, a constant reminder of the choices he had made, but he had learned that it was never too late to change. As the evening drew to a close, the family sat together in a quiet, comfortable silence. There were still scars to heal, and the road ahead wasn't easy. But Earl had learned one thing, that sometimes the hardest journey was the one back to where you started, to rebuild what was broken, and to make the impossible possible. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning, and that Earl knew was all that mattered. As the months passed, Earl found himself increasingly aware of how fragile the peace in their household truly was. He was doing everything he could to prove to Vanessa, Jamie, and Tasha that he had changed, But the scars of his past actions weren't so easily erased. It was a slow process, and while there were signs of progress, there were also moments of doubt, resentment, and fear that things might never fully heal. One evening, while Earl was cleaning up after dinner, he noticed that Vanessa had been quiet. She had a distant look in her eyes, as if lost in thought. When he asked her what was wrong, she hesitated before responding. "I've been thinking, Earl," she began, her voice low and careful. "I'm not sure if we can ever go back to the way things were before. I'm not sure if I can ever trust you the same way again." The words stung, but Earl knew they were the truth. The wounds he had caused were deep, and no amount of good intentions could instantly heal the damage. "I understand," Earl said softly, his heart heavy. "I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. And I know it's going to take time, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild that trust." Vanessa didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, though her eyes remained guarded. "It's not just about us, Earl. It's about Jamie and Tasha. They've been through so much because of your choices. Jamie, he's still angry with you. He's trying to forgive, but it's hard for him. And Tasha, she doesn't say much, but I know she feels the weight of everything." Earl felt a lump form in his throat. He had failed them all in the worst possible way, and now he was fighting to make things right. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. I know I can't fix everything overnight, but I'll keep trying. For them. For you." Despite Earl's best efforts, things weren't as smooth as he had hoped. Jamie's anger was palpable, and even though they spent time together, it was clear that their relationship was far from healed. Jamie often withdrew into his room, not wanting to talk, not wanting to forgive. Tasha, while more open to reconciliation, was quiet and reserved, her small gestures of affection for her father often overshadowed by her more guarded nature. One Saturday afternoon, Earl decided to take Jamie out for a drive. He had tried to talk to him before, but it never felt like Jamie was truly listening. This time, he hoped that a quiet, private moment might offer an opportunity for them to connect. "Jamie," Earl began, his voice steady but earnest, "I know you're angry with me, and I understand why. I've hurt you, and I can't take that back. But I'm here now, and I want to do better. I want to earn your trust again." Jamie looked out the window, his expression unreadable. "You think saying sorry is enough? You think that's just going to fix everything? You left us, Dad. You left us for her." Earl's heart sank, but he pressed on. "I can't fix the past, but I can be here now. I know it's going to take time, but I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to stay. And if you ever want to talk, I'm ready." Jamie didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he muttered, "I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad. I don't know if I want to." The words hit Earl like a punch to the gut. But he couldn't give up, not when his son needed him more than ever. "That's okay, Jamie. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. All I'm asking is for a chance to show you that I can be the father you need me to be." As the weeks went by, Earl continued to put in the effort. He attended therapy with Vanessa, not just for their marriage, but also to learn how to rebuild his relationship with his kids. He became more involved in their lives, helping with school projects, going to parent-teacher meetings, and even picking up their favorite snacks when they were feeling down. He learned to listen without trying to fix things immediately, understanding that sometimes his children just needed to feel heard. But the true test of his transformation came when Tasha came to him one evening, her face wet with tears. "Dad," she said, her voice shaky, "I need you to come to my school play tomorrow. All the other dads will be there, and I don't want to be the only one without a dad in the audience." Earl's heart clenched as he realized how much his daughter had been holding in. She had kept her pain inside, perhaps out of fear that if she let it out, it might be too much for her to bear. "I'll be there, Tasha," Earl said firmly, his voice filled with emotion. "I promise you I'll be there." The next day, Earl arrived at the school play, his heart pounding in his chest. As he walked into the auditorium, he saw the other fathers sitting proudly in the front rows. Tasha was on stage, dressed in her costume, looking around for someone in the crowd. When she finally spotted him, her face broke into a small, tentative smile. Earl waved, his heart full of both guilt and hope. This was a moment that meant more to him than anything else. He couldn't undo the years he had lost, but he could show his daughter that he was here now, that he was present. After the play, Tasha ran up to him, her eyes shining with tears. "You came, Dad. You really came. I told you I would," Earl said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I wasn't there before, but I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." Tasha wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in a long while, Earl felt like he was finally, truly, making progress. It wasn't an easy road. There were still days when Jamie withdrew into his anger, when Vanessa's forgiveness seemed just out of reach, and when the weight of his past choices pressed heavily on Earl's shoulders. But with every step, he became more determined to rebuild what he had lost. He learned to be patient with himself and with his family, understanding that healing couldn't be rushed. Slowly, Jamie started to open up again, sharing his frustrations and his thoughts with his father, though there were still moments of silence. Tasha, too, began to trust him more, though she was always cautious. And Vanessa, while still wary, started to see the man Earl was becoming, not just the man who had hurt her. Earl knew that their journey wasn't over. The damage he had caused would always be there, but he had learned that redemption wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up day after day, proving that he could be trusted, and that his family was worth fighting for. And so, as the months turned into years, Earl continued to fight, not just for his marriage or his relationship with his children, but for the chance to be the man they needed him to be. He had learned that the true measure of a person wasn't how they started, but how they chose to finish, and he was determined to finish this journey with the people he loved, the ones who mattered most. As Earl worked tirelessly to rebuild his relationships, new challenges began to arise, each one testing his resolve. The slow but steady progress he had made with his family was threatened when Vanessa's old friends began to question her decision to take him back. They reminded her of the man who had walked away from her, who had abandoned their children. Some of her friends didn't understand why she was even considering forgiving Earl. It was hard for her to explain to them, especially when she herself wasn't sure about her feelings. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation with a friend, Vanessa sat in the kitchen, her face troubled. Earl had been out in the yard with the kids, playing a game of catch, trying to make up for all the time he had lost. As he walked inside, he noticed the furrowed brow on Vanessa's face. "Vanessa," Earl said, his voice careful. "What's going on?" She didn't answer immediately, just stared at the counter, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Finally, she spoke. "I had a conversation with Karen today. She doesn't understand why I'm still holding on to you. She says I'm wasting my time, that I'm setting myself up for disappointment." Earl swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "And what do you think?" Vanessa sighed, looking up at him. "I don't know anymore. I've given you so many chances, Earl. And it feels like every time we take a step forward, something happens that reminds me of what you did. It hurts so much, and I can't keep pretending it doesn't." Earl's chest tightened, but he knew that he had to respect her feelings. He wasn't entitled to her forgiveness, and if he wanted to make things work, he had to prove that he wasn't just waiting for her to heal, but that he was genuinely committed to the journey, no matter how long it took. "I understand," he said softly. "I don't have any excuses for what I did, and I know it's hard to believe that I've changed. But I'm here, Vanessa. I've been here every day, and I'm not going anywhere. I'll keep proving to you that I'm worth trusting again, even if it takes years." Vanessa looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any hint of doubt or insincerity. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter but firm. "I need time, Earl. I need more time. And I need to know that you're not doing this just because you think it's what I want to hear, but because it's what you really want." Because this isn't just about us anymore. It's about the kids too. Earl nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his bones. He wasn't just rebuilding his marriage, he was rebuilding his entire family. And he knew that if he was going to regain Vanessa's trust, he had to show her that he was committed to their future, no matter how many people doubted him. Time passed, and the family began to adapt to their new dynamic. Earl and Vanessa continued to attend therapy, not just for their marriage, but for their children as well. It was a difficult process, but it was starting to pay off. Jamie was slowly opening up, though there were still days when he pulled away. Tasha, ever the thoughtful one, began to show more affection towards her father, sometimes surprising him with a hug or a word of encouragement. One weekend, Earl planned a family outing. He knew it was important to create new memories, ones that didn't carry the weight of the past. So, he suggested they all go to the beach, a place they used to visit when things were good. Vanessa was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. It had been a long time since they had done anything like this as a family. As they arrived at the beach, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over the water. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing, and for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of peace between them. Jamie was the first to jump into the water, followed by Tasha, who was more reserved but eventually waded in after him. Vanessa stood on the shore, watching them, and Earl took her hand. "I remember when we came here before," Earl said, his voice soft. "Back when everything was simpler." Vanessa smiled faintly. I remember when we used to talk about our dreams and our future." "We still have a future, Vanessa," Earl said quietly. "We can still build it. It might take time, but we can still do it. Together." She squeezed his hand, looking at him with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "I want to believe that, Earl. I really do." As the kids played in the water, laughing and shouting, Earl felt a flicker of hope. There were still so many unknowns, so many challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt like they were all moving forward together. He wasn't perfect and neither was anyone else, but he knew that as long as they kept showing up for each other, they could make it through anything. Months later, Earl received a call from Michelle. She had been quiet for a while, and Earl hadn't given much thought to her. But the call caught him off guard. "Earl," she said, her voice cold but distant. "I need to talk to you." "I don't think there's much left to say, Michelle," Earl replied, his voice steady but firm. "I made my choices and I've moved on." Michelle was silent for a moment. "I know," she said finally, "but I need to see you. I need to tell you something." Earl hesitated. He had no desire to open that door again, but he also knew that some things couldn't be left unresolved. "All right. Where do you want to meet?" They agreed to meet at a cafe. Earl didn't know what to expect, but he was determined not to let his past pull him back. When he arrived, Michelle was sitting alone, looking as sharp as ever. There was no warmth in her eyes, only the distant air of someone who had moved on from the past. But Earl could see the tension in her posture, and he knew something was weighing on her. "I've been thinking a lot, Earl," Michelle began. "About everything. About how we ended. And I realized I was wrong too." Earl raised an eyebrow. "Wrong about what?" "About us. About how I treated you. I didn't respect your family, and I thought I could offer you something that would make you forget everything. But I was wrong. I see that now." Earl felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Michelle's admission didn't change anything, but it felt like a final closure to a chapter he had long left behind. "I appreciate you saying that," Earl said, "but I've made my choices, and I'm not looking back anymore." As they finished their conversation, Earl felt a sense of peace he hadn't expected. Michelle was part of his past, and he didn't need to revisit it. He had moved forward, and that was all that mattered now. Months passed, and Earl continued to prove his commitment to his family. He worked hard every day, showing up for Vanessa, Jamie, and Tasha. Their relationships continued to grow, and although there were still difficult moments, the bond between them was stronger than it had ever been. Vanessa, and Earl's marriage was still in progress, but they were learning to communicate more openly, to love each other not for who they used to be, but for who they were becoming. Jamie was still wary, but he had begun to trust his father again, and Tasha had blossomed into a confident young girl who now knew that her father was there for her. The road ahead was long, but Earl knew that with each passing day, they were all getting closer to the future they deserved, one built on patience, forgiveness, and love. And as he sat with his family on a quiet evening, watching the sunset together, Earl realized that the mistakes of the past no longer had the power to define him. It wasn't the choices he had made that mattered now. It was the choices he was making every day to be the man he wanted to be, for his family, for himself, and for the future they were creating together. As the seasons changed, so did the dynamics of Earl's family. They were no longer just trying to rebuild what had been broken. They were learning to grow together in ways they hadn't before. The shared experiences, the quiet moments, and even the difficult conversations became the foundation for something stronger than before. Earl continued his commitment to his family, but he also noticed a deeper shift in himself. His perspective on life, love, and family had transformed. He had become more patient, more understanding, and less quick to react. Vanessa, too, had begun to open up more, her trust in him gradually strengthening as she saw his actions consistently reflect his words. She didn't offer forgiveness easily, but she had stopped looking at him with the same wariness, as if she was waiting for him to slip up. Instead, there was hope in her eyes, hope that, together, they could create a new kind of future. One Sunday afternoon, Earl decided to take a break from his usual routine. He planned a family outing, a visit to a small park nearby that had been a favorite spot when the kids were younger. It wasn't anything extravagant, but Earl wanted to take the time to celebrate the simple joy of being together. As they walked through the park, with the sound of the children's laughter echoing in the background, Earl took a moment to reflect. He realized how much he had taken for granted in the past: the laughter of his children, the easy conversations with Vanessa, the moments of peace they once shared. He had lost it all in pursuit of something that had felt like an escape, but now he understood that the true escape was in the love and support of his family. After a long walk, they sat on a bench near the lake, the sun slowly dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Earl looked at his family: Jamie, who had been more open with him recently; Tasha, who now constantly sought his attention with her drawings and stories; and Vanessa, who, though quiet, seemed at peace beside him. "Vanessa," Earl said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I know it's been a long road, and I know I've made mistakes, but I want you to know, every day I'm grateful for the second chance you gave me. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I promise I'll keep trying. For all of us." Vanessa turned to him, her expression softer than it had been in years. "I've been hard on you, Earl," she said. "I've been holding on to so much anger and disappointment. But you've shown me over time that you're committed, not just to me but to our family. And that means more than I ever thought it would." Earl smiled, a mixture of relief and pride flooding through him. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer controlled him. However, despite the progress, some things were still unfinished. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Earl sat down with Vanessa to talk. The conversation wasn't easy, but it was necessary. They had avoided it for a while because it was painful, because they didn't have all the answers. But now, it was time to confront the truth of what happened between them. "Earl," Vanessa began slowly, "there's something I've been thinking about. Something we never really talked about. You know, when you left, it wasn't just about you going to Michelle. It was about everything that led to that. The times you were distant. The times I tried to reach you, but you shut me out. I wasn't enough for you, and I felt that. It's something I still struggle with." Earl felt his stomach twist as he listened to Vanessa's words. He had heard her pain before, but hearing it again, from her own lips, made the hurt feel fresh. "I know," he said quietly. "I was wrong. I pushed you away when all you wanted was to be close. I wasn't strong enough to face what I was feeling. I'm sorry, Vanessa. I'm sorry for all of it. Vanessa wiped her eyes, though she didn't cry. I know you're sorry. I see that. But there are times when I wonder if I'll ever be enough. If I'll ever feel like we can truly move past everything. Earl reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. You are enough, Vanessa. You always were. But I have to show you that every day. I have to prove to you that I'm here not just because I'm sorry, but because I truly want to be with you. Not just as your husband, but as your partner, your equal. We've been through a lot, but I don't want to go another day without showing you that I'm here for you, every part of you. Vanessa looked at him, the tension in her shoulders easing a little. I don't know if it will ever feel the same, Earl. But maybe we can build something new, something stronger. Earl nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. That's all I want, Vanessa. To build something better, together. The months that followed were filled with continued work, but it was different now. It wasn't about simply trying to fix what was broken. It was about creating a new life from the lessons they had learned. Earl and Vanessa attended counseling together, but they also began doing things they had never done before, taking weekend trips, revisiting old hobbies, and even attending workshops on communication. They both knew that the past would always be a part of them, but it no longer defined them. Jamie, too, had started to find peace in his own way. His relationship with his father was still a work in progress, but he was less angry now, more willing to meet Earl halfway. They spent more time together, and sometimes, Jamie would ask questions about Earl's mistakes. It wasn't easy, but Earl answered honestly, knowing that transparency was the only way forward. Tasha, ever the peacemaker, began to blossom more. She was confident in her relationship with her father, often seeking him out to share her artwork or ask his advice. The bond between them had deepened, and Earl couldn't have been more grateful for it. One afternoon, as Earl was helping Tasha with a school project, Vanessa sat nearby, watching them with a smile on her face. It was moments like these that reminded her of why she had fought so hard to hold her family together. The love wasn't perfect, but it was real, and sometimes that was enough. Earl looked over at Vanessa, catching her gaze. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. For giving me a chance. For giving us a chance. Vanessa smiled, her eyes soft. It's not just you, Earl. We've both changed. We're both learning to be better. Earl nodded, his heart full. He had learned so much in the past few years, about forgiveness, about patience, and most importantly, about the importance of showing up every day for the people who mattered most. As the family sat together that evening, surrounded by the warmth of love and laughter, Earl knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be bumps along the way. But he also knew that as long as they faced the future together, nothing could tear them apart. For the first time in a long time, Earl believed in the future he was building, with his family, with Vanessa, with Jamie and Tasha. And that was all he ever needed.